Oh, hello. Excuse me. We were only... Well, I was actually only just testing the YouTube thing, but we got some questions. Hang on, let me just turn this audio off. How do I turn it off? Oh, just have to close it, I guess. So somebody's asked, Hanbai, trying to import a character model as an avatar. This is for IMVU, for those that are not familiar with IMVU. But I don't understand. I got the file and then it asked me for what product ID it was between 1 and 99. I don't know what to do from there. Oh, it is live. It's just that it was audio only, as in music, not mic. Okay, so Hanbai, where is the model from? I don't know what the delay is like on chat, so because that will determine what you do or how you import the character, because let me see if I can find it. I cannot find it. During the FBX testing, when I was doing the stuff for IMVU, one of the... Oh, there it is. Okay, so... Right, so... Oh, Ugandan Knuckles. Classic meme. That's going to live on in history, is that? So it's going to be tricky because not because of anything specific with respect to the skeleton, the avatar that you're using, and the mesh. Your issue is going to be, so I don't know if you can... That's the shoulder joints. Oh, hang on, I've got the wrong... well, the bones location. This is the shoulder. These are the two shoulder bones. And as you can see, there's quite a distance between the shoulders of the mesh and the bones of the skeleton. So you're going to have... it's going to be tricky to match the mesh with the skeleton so that it deforms properly, because I don't know if I did this with this. This is a working file, a working prototype. We were trying to sort out bringing in a completely different character, which is this, and trying to see if it could be brought in via FBX and set up for the FBX importer-exporter path. But as you can see, the problem is that the mesh isn't proportionally matched to the skeleton, and that will be your main issue with the Ugandan Knuckles model or mesh that you use, is that it's not going to be in proportion to the skeleton. So you will likely have to do some distortion of the mesh to get it to fit. So that might mean, you know, just... is that on? Where's proportional editing gone? Turn that on. it's not working for some peculiar reason. Let's try that. So even for me, this is sometimes Blender is a pain in the potatoes because it doesn't always do what you expect it to. But anyway, you will have to distort the mesh in some way, shape or form so that it fits the skeleton. And that's going to be your main challenge. And then once you've got that sorted out, it's just a question of vertex painting or vertex grouping. Yes, we did do it for this. So control. So it's just going to be a question of vertex painting the mesh to match a skeleton so that when the skeleton moves, did we do it for this? No. Oh yes, we did. See, as you can see here, so the skeleton's orientation is completely different to the mesh. So if you try and match the mesh up as you would, you know, without doing anything, this is what's going to happen when you start deforming, when the mesh, when the armature articulates. It's going to distort the mesh because the deformation is relative to the position of the mesh and the skeleton bones. And as you can see, there's not a one-to-one correlation, so it distorts. And that's going to be the big challenge that you will find. But in terms of actually just meshing something and converting it, and you know, there's nothing wrong with using the Ugandan knuckles mesh. It's just you'll have to do a bit of tinkering to get it to fit the skeleton. Okay, so somebody's put as Hanbai's saying that somebody's already submitted this again is for IMVU. Somebody's already submitted it, so it's just a model from Sketchfab, a 3D model. Yes, so that I mean, subject to usage rights, that shouldn't be an issue. But you may have to do some optimization on that as well, because if it's for Sketchfab, which is 3D printing, you will likely find that you'll need to reduce the density of the mesh. We can actually take a look at it if you've got the link to hand. Oh, yeah. YouTube won't let you paste links in chat. Okay, so not to worry. Well, I shall continue with what I was about to do then. Unless there are other IMVU related questions. This is the clothing armature. So all the bones are orientated the way they should be if you were using Blender to create something. We were just using, this is when we were trying to sort out the FBX import export stuff in IMVU, for IMVU. We created two skeletons. One, which you can see on screen, is how things should be if you were using Blender. And then the other one is the one that's available, how things actually are relative to 3D Studio Max. But well, 6, 7, okay. So this is essentially what you would be doing. So although this is just a robot, just, you know, the very basic character, what you would be doing is essentially the same. So you would have to distort the mesh so that it fits the skeleton. And so long as you've got that, it'll work. And it'll deform the way that you expect it to. But as you can see, this isn't a standard avatar. It's you know, it's Futurama Fry dressed as a robot. But this could just as easily be the Ugandan Knuckles mesh. So essentially all you're doing is matching the mesh and the skeleton together, and it should work. But it'll just take a bit of tweaking. But you have to use, if you're doing a mesh replacement, you have to use this particular version of the skeleton, which is on Cat's Bits. Let me just... where's the file gone? Right, so there we go. That's you have to use, go to, well, you can see the URL, Cat's Bits, forum, index, blah blah blah. But you need to download the starter file when you're messing around with avatars, and it's the standard clothing one that you have to use, because that is what's on screen at the moment. If you use the one that's for posing, the mesh tends to sort of doesn't work as well for some reason, and it's to do, I think, with the orientation of the bones. So for mesh replacements for clothing as well, you have to use this particular version of the skeleton, which is available there. Yes, that's so. Liana's asking. So this is the IMVU skeleton, yes. That's the one for clothing. So that's the one for clothing. And as you can see, all the bones are as you might expect them to be. But this is the one for posing. The bones are... oh, I'd have to adjust those. The bones are off kilter because they have to match 3D Studio Max, else they won't work. But poses, it's just a question of, when you are doing poses, it's best to keep the rotation widget active instead of the default translate, because it just makes it easy to rotate the bones in a way that appears natural relative to the skeleton. The mesh relative to the skeleton, I should say. Well, I don't know if I don't know about it being. I think it's just a standard representation of bones. So, if as Liana's saying, that it looks almost like DAS bones. I think octahedrons are just a standard way of displaying bones. So they may have slight differences in appearance, but they're pretty much a standard across all applications as far as I'm aware. But when you're doing your poses, seeing as we have this open, one of the problems that people encounter is when they are manipulating the limbs, they tend to stick to the biggest primary bones, which are thigh or upper leg and lower leg. And what that can do is, although this looks okay in Blender, if you export this and bring it into IMVU, his butt cheek will be distorted, because what you need to do is, let's say we were doing a pose where he's about to kick something. The actual the bend or kink in the leg isn't at the thigh. It's at the hip. Now, is that this bone? Yeah, that's this bone. So you have to make use of the hip bones, and then you can do a bit more rotation. And what that does is the hip bone distorts the hip area of the mesh so that it follows through to the leg, to the lower leg. If you don't do that, what ends up happening is, let me just clear that. The mesh doesn't change at the hip. So when you bend the leg in IMVU, it kinks and collapses. You might be able to see it there actually. It kinks and collapses the mesh. So make sure when you're doing poses that you're actually maneuvering and manipulating more than just the two biggest bones that you can see. So keep in mind your own anatomy and how, for instance, you might bring your leg back to kick. Anywhere else you can hand bias wanting to send if you are logging, send it through personal PM on in IMVU. That'll be all right. And yes, Liana, that is why some of the, particularly at the hip and the shoulder, because we have this tiny little bone as the shoulder, and that's where the rotation of the shoulder should be, not with this bone, which is the bicep. So as you can see there, it kinks and collapses the mesh, because the bicep is only really for twisting. It's not for shoulder rotation, which is why a lot of poses tend to look funny, because people are using this big bone and manipulating the shoulder to create a pose. So this pose, this file is available as well on that same link. So if you go to the Catspits forum and then just go to the IMVU section, and you'll find the downloads. And I need to open Firefox. Go to IMVU. They haven't sent it through yet, so we shall wait on Hanbei. Yeah, I don't know, as Liana's commenting on how DAS does things. I don't know if, in theory, if DAS respects the hierarchy that IMVU is looking for, Jedi mind trick, if DAS respects the hierarchy and the bone structure, it should in theory be possible to create poses in DAS, but you may encounter the same orientation issues. You may encounter the same orientation issues that Blender has. Oh, there we go. So, hang on. Right, so Sketchfab, copy link, paste. And this is going to be so difficult not to do a stereotypical Ugandan knuckles accent, which will get us all into trouble. Okay, so how do we can we see the move to a new tab? Just minimize that down a little bit. So yes, that's the Ugandan knuckle. For those that don't know what this is, so this is Knuckles from Sonic the Hedgehog, I think. But in relation to what we were just discussing with the armature, his shoulders are hugely wide, and so is his hips. So it might be possible, but you'll be struggling to get it to fit, because you've got the opposite problem. Essentially, you've got the opposite problem of can I just open? Yeah, so with the Ugandan Knuckles avatar, if you were wanting to bring that in, you've got the opposite problem to this avatar. So its shoulders are too narrow, arms too short. So you can imagine trying to get that character to fit this skeleton. His shoulders are, I would imagine, about where the elbows are. So that's going to be quite tricky to get that to match and deform. Really don't know why this caused so much controversy. But in terms of it doesn't look like it's too dense. It looks pretty low resolution, so that should be okay. But that's going to be your challenge, is getting it to fit. Yes, Liana, that's if it was brought in as just a static or simple animated furniture item, then it wouldn't be an issue. You wouldn't need to worry about all the skeleton and matching things up. You just bring it in as a mesh. And so they made him an avatar. Hanbai is saying they made an avatar from it. So let's take a look at that actually then. So somebody's uploaded that character as a product to IMVU. So Knuckles. Oh, it doesn't look. So, dare we do this? Yes, let's do this. So we're going to try it. Looks like you can derive. Can you derive from it? Yes, you can derive from it. That's all right. You have to remove. Hanbai is saying you have to remove head and stuff. Yes. So if we derive from this, we can probably see how they've set the mesh up. So this is IMVU for those that don't know, because this is on YouTube. Oh, it's tiny. That is nightmarish. So let's derive from the product to have a look at, see how it's been set up. So we're going into edit mode, or not edit mode, opening an editor. Yeah, super tiny. So looking at the mesh, so there's just the one mesh. Yes, so it's overriding the default avatar mesh, but not the avatar skeleton. So it is just brought in as a static. It doesn't do anything. So if you wanted to do that, then that's how you would do it. You would just, I guess, what you would do is vertex group it to skeleton master root, which is the bone at the bottom. So let me just turn the names on for the bones. So that's skeleton master root. So if you want to bring that character in, that mesh, that's what you would do. You'd create a vertex group, one of these things, and that would be called female 03 master root, and that would enable you to bring it in and essentially lock it to the location of that bone without causing any issues with distortion with it when the character animates, because most of the other bones distort when the character in IMVU is doing something. The only bone that doesn't is female master root, so that's probably what they've done. There's a shame. It would be nice to see him moving. So let's get some perspective on this. Actors. See how big he is. Yeah, so he's super tiny. Yeah, you could do skinny, I mean, you could distort it. I mean, you'd have to essentially do something to get it to fit to the skeleton as discussed. But that is essentially just a mesh replacement. There's nothing particularly sophisticated about what's going on here. All they've done is just replace the default avatar mesh. And I would imagine that it's just a simple grouping, vertex grouping or weight painting to female O3 master root. And I think, Hanbai, you messaged me about this previously, as I have a message from you about something like this, so I guess this is what you were actually trying to do. So there we go, we've answered your question. 6324688. So let's have a look at that product version. Shop Knuckles. Oh, right. Yeah. So this is the right. So this is the so let's see if we can we derive from this? No, we can't. So let's try it. Bye-bye, Ugandan Knuckles. Yeah, so they've changed the mesh to fit the avatar, and that's the only way you can get it to work. And obviously they've got this from somewhere. But that's essentially what you have to do if you want to get it to fit the avatar in IMVU, else you do what the other one is. You just do a simple mesh replacement. Yeah, and of course, needless to say, this is intellectual property, so you have to be careful about what you do with these and whether you do anything with them, because you may be able to upload it to the catalogue, but that's no guarantee that it'll stay there. Right, I'm going to close the shop because it's killing my computer. But essentially, avatar replacements aren't really that difficult in terms of what it is that you're actually doing. The difficulty is in making sure that you have the weight painting all done correctly, so that it distorts properly when you move the skeleton. That's the hard bit, is getting that to work. I mean, everything else is just pretty straightforward. You're just making a mesh, positioning it relative to the skeleton, and then weight painting. Whoops. Yes, so Hanbai is saying, well, that was interesting. You're welcome. Just wanted to see what he did, even if the model is stiff. Yeah, so basically all he's done is essentially brought in the mesh and weight painted it to the root bone so that it doesn't do anything. It's just a mesh. It's essentially just a glorified furniture item in that respect. So, anything else? It's weird, typing chat is in real time, but the video isn't. So you can type comments in essentially real time in response to people's other comments, but they're still watching the video in the past, which is odd. Yeah, it would make a better pet. Yes, so there is a pet file. I don't think I've made that available yet. Have I made that available? Avatars, pets. Updated. I don't think yes, so there is you could make it a pet, but again it wouldn't really do much. I mean, for this, so if you imagine one of these cubes is the Ugandan knuckles mesh, because that's all it is, it's just a mesh, you could literally just set it up as a very simple pet and parent it to the pet structure, skeleton, which is very, very simple, and bring it in as a pet. Wouldn't do anything, but that would be a simple way of using it. Hanbai's asking if you could do that with the model. Well, essentially, yes. I mean, if you've got the mesh, you shouldn't have any issues. As long as you can get the thing into Blender and you've got the starter files, or the appropriate starter file loaded, you shouldn't have any issues with that. That should be fine. You should be able to bring the mesh in, get it set up as per whatever it is that you want it to be, whether it's a furniture item or a pet. Get it set up with respect to the skeleton that you need to use, and then export to FBX. And then you should be able to bring that in via the importer as a pet or a furniture item, or, I mean, even an accessory. It's just a question of making sure that you have the object, the mesh itself, set up with respect to the mesh, with the armature that you're using per item. So you'd need, if you're going to do it as an accessory, you need the accessory armature. If you're doing it as a furniture item, you need the furniture item, furniture armature, or a pet, you need the pet armature. Yes, parent it anywhere. Well, not so much anywhere, but the locations for the pets. If you want it to move in relation to the head, there's a specific skeleton for the head node, which attaches to the, I think it's the head bone. But that moves with the avatar. If you didn't want it to move with the avatar, you parent it to a structure that's locked to or targets the root bone. So that means that the avatar can move, but the pet will stay where it is. And similarly, you've got left side, right side, or left side, right side, depending on the placement of this bone. That can be on the left or the right. But this should export without any issue to FBX, which you can then import into IMVU. I could have sworn I updated this, but to update using the new nodes system, that's it-ish. So a basic pet, you just need a single bone or a single node, and then export that to FBX and import it in derived from the default pet, and it should work. It should work without any issue. Because again, all you're doing is matching the mesh to the skeletal structure that you're using, depending on the item that it's supposed to be. Yes, it's Liana saying yes, so depending on where you want the pet to be, so by default, Z head, which is this one, that's just positioned off to one side, but that can be positioned, well, that needs to stay where it is. But if you had a pet that sat on the shoulder, you would have a bone. In fact, you might be able to you might be able to actually do that, to parent it to a specific bone so that it moves. So if depending on how the avatar moves, because if you just parent it to the standard Z head, it'll move relative to the pet structure instead of the armature, which is what you actually want. No, Liana's just asking whether a bone is the same as a node in Hexagon and DAZ Studio. No, they're not. They're completely different things. A node is essentially an empty or null object. It's essentially just a point in space, and the thing that you see, in this case it's just a wireframe, that's just a visual aid so that you know that there's something supposed to be there. A bone is completely different. I mean, it does obviously mark a structure, but that has an actual physical presence in a sense, whereas a node doesn't. It's just a point in space. So if you were to import this into another application, all you would have is just a a point in space. You wouldn't necessarily have a wireframe cube. No, no, I don't hand buy. I don't make meshes for. Hand buy was saying that they want a Knuckles pet now. No, I don't do that. You'd risk also having the thing removed because it's intellectual property, so. Well, if you want to stick around, I'm going to continue on with this tailor's the backdrop. This tailor's room backdrop. Just going to make a mirror. So I'm just going to add a mesh. Mesh cube. Hang on, did I actually start? I think I... Oh, yeah. Well, let's just use this. So, rotate that. So again, you can use your manipulator widgets or just press your shortcut keys, you know, R, S and G. So R is rotate, S is scale, and G is translate. And if you want to lock the action to a particular axes, press your key that you want to initiate the function for, so in this case it's rotate, and then press either Y, X or Z. Whoops. And you can do that for scale as well. So that's Z, that's X, and that's Y. And then again, translate, so that's the Z key, so it moves it up and down, X, side to side in this instance, and then front to back, again, just depending on the orientation of the object. No, that's perfectly fine, Hanbai. That's fine. That's kind of what these live streams are for. If you have questions, you'll get answers. So I'm going to inset this selected face, and this will create a frame for us which will act as a frame around a mirror. So if we want precision, we can just move the mouse and it's free form, but if we want precision you can actually type a value. And as you can see, there's text running along the bottom of the 3D view, and it's thickness, which is the value you need to pay attention to. So I want about 25, and then just hit enter, and that sets it in place. You don't want to extrude inwards, although you could do. But in this instance, all I'm going to do is just move it backwards to create a slight frame. That's fine. And then use this one that we added. Use this to create a foot. Yes, eventually. Leon is just asking if this is for IMVU. It is. Whoops daisy, stream just went a bit wonky. Undo that. So when you're making something and it looks okay as an object, if it's supposed to fit with something else, always make sure to double check its size relative to whatever it is that it's supposed to be part of. Because although that looks okay on its own right, that's too small, or too short I should say, to hold this mirror. So we have to make it, whoops, we have to make it longer. So we can select these end faces and just scale it outwards. So that we get a better shape relative to the object that we're creating. That might be a bit too big actually. That'll do. Select those two. Snap cursor. And then what we can do is use that cursor position to add another mesh object. Scale that down. Yeah, that's okay. Join those two together. So that's Control J. Select both objects, Control J. Joins them into a single mesh. And then we can just duplicate that across. So that's Shift D. Place it where we need it to be. And there we have the start of a mirror object. So what we can do here is, now that we've got the basics, join those two together. Do a little bit of shaping. Select one of those, snap cursor, add a cube again. Rotate this on its 45. So hold this control key down whilst you're doing that to snap to grid. And this will give us a pivot point, or something that approximates a pivot point. Where's the center? Alright, so that's the center. Snap to grid, snap to object, duplicate, and then we can mirror this and use the cursor as the pivot point. So essentially what we're doing is duplicating this across to the other side. So that's Control M, and then it'll be Y. But we want to use the cursor, so we can either press the period or full stop key, which will shift the. We have to cancel out of that actually. Let's do that again. Control M. There we go. So that flips the pivot to the other side. I want to cancel the position of the cursor, so that's the comma key, and just move this so that it's just a little above center point of the mirror object. Might do some old style fancy wing nuts at some point, but that'll do for now. Join all these together. Smooth. So we now need to enable auto smooth, which splits the mesh based on the value, the degree that's set. So without that, if smoothing is active, without that you get this mushy, undefined appearance. With it, it automatically splits the mesh depending on the value that's assigned in the angle, which will leave some faces smooth instead of faceted. Do the same thing for the mirror. Click smooth. And then what we have to do with this, because the value is too shallow, so what we can do here is use mark sharp, and that creates a sharp edge where we need it. And if you wanted to, you could also you could also mark the edges, all the corners, if you were doing a more sophisticated shape, which would create a faceted appearance. And it's best to do this manually to make sure that when you import the mesh, it does have... You might see that some meshes, when you bring them into IMVU, they look faceted, and that's why. So this hasn't got a material, so I'll just quickly assign a material. And this will be 256. 512 UV grid. That's okay. And use that same material on the mirror itself. So because we've already created that on a blank mesh that doesn't have a material, you can add one that's already been created. And then edit mode and assign the image. And then we go through the process of adjusting the UVs. Well, this was only really meant to be a quickie, so I shall call it quits here. And then we shall see what happens on the next stream. So thanks for watching and commenting.